The smug police officer locked cold steel cuffs on the wrists of this ebony-skinned uniformed soldier. He smirked, entirely convinced he held some phony seeking stolen honor. He never knew this fierce person he just mocked is one highly respected colonel. Plus her swift, strictly done counter-strike will destroy his job forever. The sky over Richmond, Virginia, was a bruised, heavy purple, threatening rain that hadn't quite committed to falling. At a sprawling Shell gas station just off Interstate 95, the afternoon traffic was a steady, noisy hum. Alicia Reynolds stood by pump number 4, the nozzle resting in the tank of her dark blue sedan. At 46 years old, Alicia commanded a presence that didn't require her to raise her voice or puff out her chest. She had spent 22 years in the United States Army, surviving 2 combat deployments to Afghanistan, countless bureaucratic wars at the Pentagon, and the grueling climb up a ladder that was entirely stacked against her. Today she was wearing her OCP's operational camouflage pattern. Pinned to the center of her chest was the silver eagle of a full-bird colonel. She was just trying to get a cup of black coffee and a tank of premium gas before a mandatory briefing at Fort Belvoir. Inside the brightly lit convenience store, a 20-year-old cashier named Kyle was ringing up a line of customers. Near the coffee station stood Mitchell Davies. Mitchell was in his late 50s, sporting a faded tactical cap with a generic flag patch, a tight t-shirt stretched over a beer belly, and a lingering sense of resentment about how the world was changing. Mitchell had served 3 years in the peacetime military back in the late 80s, a fact he made sure everyone in a 5-mile radius knew on a daily basis. As Alicia walked through the sliding glass doors, the little bell chiming above her, Mitchell's eyes locked onto her, his gaze dragged up and down her uniform. He looked at her boots. He looked at the combat action badge on her chest. He looked at her hair, neatly secured in a regulation bun, and finally he stared at the silver eagle. In Mitchell's narrow worldview, a black woman in her mid-40s did not walk around wearing the rank of a colonel. To him, the math didn't add up. She didn't look like the colonels he remembered from his brief stint at Fort Bragg 30 years ago. Therefore, she had to be a fake. Alicia felt the stare. Any woman who has spent 2 decades in the armed forces develops a sixth sense for that specific brand of hostile scrutiny. She ignored it. She poured her dark roast coffee, snapped a plastic lid onto the cup, and walked toward the register. "Excuse me." A raspy, loud voice echoed through the store. Alicia didn't turn immediately. She placed her coffee on the counter and pulled out her phone to use Apple Pay. "Hey, I'm talking to you, Colonel," Mitchell barked, taking 2 aggressive steps toward her. The sarcasm in his voice was thick enough to choke on. Kyle, the young cashier, froze, his hand hovering over the barcode scanner. The 2 other customers in the store nervously stepped back, sensing the sudden spike in tension. Alicia turned slowly. Her expression was neutral, carved from years of dealing with insubordinate subordinates and arrogant contractors. "Can I help you?" "What unit are you with?" Mitchell demanded, crossing his arms. He was standing too close, invading her personal space, trying to use his physical size to intimidate her. "I'm not interested in discussing my assignment with a stranger," Alicia replied evenly. Her voice was calm, but the boundary she set was absolute. She turned back to Kyle. "Just the coffee, please." "Yeah, that's what I thought," Mitchell sneered, turning his head to make sure the other customers were listening. "You people buy this crap at an army surplus store and think you can just parade around getting free discounts and stolen glory. Where'd you get the bird?" "eBay." Alicia paused. A cold anger flickered in her chest, but her training kept it locked behind a wall of pure discipline. She had fought Taliban insurgents in the Karengal Valley. She wasn't about to lose her temper at a gas station over a disgruntled civilian playing tactical dress-up. She looked Mitchell dead in the eye. "Sir, I strongly advise you to step back and lower your voice. You are making a fool of yourself." "Stolen valor," Mitchell shouted, his face turning red. "That's a federal crime. You aren't a colonel. You don't even know how to properly blouse your boots, and your flag patch is off-center." It wasn't, of course. Alicia's uniform was immaculate. But Mitchell wasn't looking at facts. He was looking at his own prejudices. Alicia paid for her coffee, took her receipt, and walked past him, completely ignoring his frantic, red-faced rant. Her silence infuriated him more than any insult could have. As she pushed through the sliding doors and walked back out to her car, Mitchell pulled out his cell phone. Yeah, 911. Mitchell said loudly into the receiver, pressing his face against the store window to watch Alicia. I need an officer at the Shell station on Route 1. I've got a fraud here. A woman impersonating a military officer, harassing people, trying to run a scam. Kyle, watching from behind the register, whispered, Dude, she wasn't doing anything. Shut up, kid, Mitchell snapped. I know a fake when I see one, and I'm making sure she gets what's coming to her. Officer Gregory Finch was having a slow, irritating Tuesday. At 28 years old, Finch had been with the local police department for barely 3 years. He was the kind of cop who watched a few too many action movies, wore wraparound sunglasses even when it was cloudy, and treated every minor traffic stop like a high-stakes cartel takedown. He was constantly looking for a bust that would get his name in the local paper. When the dispatch call came over the radio, suspicious person, possible fraud/impersonating military personnel at the Route 1 Shell, Finch flipped on his lights and hit the gas. A stolen Valor bust. That was perfect. Those videos always went viral online. He could already picture the commendation. Alicia had just finished pumping her gas. She screwed the cap back on, closed the fuel door, and was opening the driver's side door of her sedan when the wail of a police siren pierced the humid air. A patrol cruiser swung sharply into the gas station lot, tires screeching unnecessarily on the wet pavement. The car angled aggressively, blocking Alicia's sedan from backing out of the pump. The red and blue strobe lights painted the gray afternoon in chaotic flashing colors. Alicia sighed, her hand resting on the handle of her open car door. She didn't immediately connect the police presence to the loudmouth inside the store. She assumed there was a robbery or an accident nearby. Finch threw his cruiser door open and stepped out, his hand resting instinctively on his duty belt. He marched directly toward Alicia. At the same time, Mitchell burst out of the convenience store, pointing a stubby finger at her. That's her officer. That's the fake trying to scam people in a colonel's uniform. Finch gave Mitchell a quick acknowledging nod. In Finch's mind, the dynamic was already set. The older guy in the tactical hat was the upstanding citizen reporting a crime. The black woman, standing quietly by her car, was the suspect. Ma'am, step away from the vehicle and keep your hands where I can see them, Finch ordered, his voice echoing loudly across the concrete lot. Alicia's brow furrowed. She closed her car door, but stayed exactly where she was. Officer, is there a problem? I said step away from the vehicle, Finch barked, closing the distance between them. He stopped about 4 feet away, puffing his chest out. We received a call about an individual impersonating a military officer for financial gain. Alicia's eyes flicked to Mitchell, who was standing on the curb with a smug, self-satisfied grin plastered across his face. She turned her attention back to the young officer. Officer, Alicia said, her voice radiating the kind of absolute, unwavering authority that only comes from decades of command. I am Colonel Alicia Reynolds, United States Army. I stopped here for fuel on my way to Fort Belvoir. I have not asked anyone for anything, let alone financial gain. That man inside decided to harass me because he doesn't believe I earned the rank on my chest. You're right, Mitchell yelled from the curb. Ask for her CAC card, officer. I bet she doesn't even know what that is. Finch held up a hand to silence Mitchell, but his eyes never left Alicia. All right, Colonel. If you're who you say you are, this should be real easy. Hand over your military ID. Alicia stood her ground. As a citizen and as a high-ranking officer who knew the law intimately, she recognized exactly what was happening. Virginia is not a stop-and-identify state. Unless an officer has reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime has been, is being, or is about to be committed. Pumping gas while wearing a uniform was not a crime, and complying with an unlawful demand driven by a civilian's racist and sexist assumptions set a dangerous precedent. Alicia glanced at his name tag. Finch, under what legal authority are you demanding my identification? What crime am I suspected of committing? Finch's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to people, especially suspects, calmly questioning his legal authority. I'm investigating a report of fraud. Now, you can hand over your ID or I can detain you for obstruction. You are investigating a baseless phone call from a man who harassed me. Alicia corrected him, her voice dropping a register, becoming colder, sharper. I am an active duty officer en route to a military installation. I have committed no crime. I have broken no laws, and I am not required to present my identification simply because that man's fragile ego couldn't handle my presence. Last warning, lady. Finch snapped, his face flushing. He was losing control of the interaction, and he knew it. Several people at the neighboring pumps had pulled out their phones and started recording. The flashing lights of the cruiser made the whole scene look incredibly dramatic. I am leaving, Alicia said calmly. She turned to open her car door. Hey, Finch yelled. Before Alicia could even touch the handle, Finch lunged forward. He grabbed her left arm, his fingers digging harshly into the fabric of her OCP sleeve, directly over her unit patch. He yanked her backward with excessive force, spinning her away from the car. Let go of me right now, Alicia commanded. It wasn't a scream. It was an order. It was the voice she used when a live fire exercise went wrong. A voice that demanded instant, total compliance. But Finch was running on adrenaline and bruised pride. You're under arrest for obstruction and resisting, he shouted, shoving her roughly against the side of her own car. Alicia did not fight back. She knew exactly how quickly situations like this could turn lethal for someone who looked like her. She went completely rigid, her face pressed against the cold metal of her sedan, her jaw clenched so tight her teeth ached. You are making a catastrophic mistake, Officer Finch, Alicia said, her voice eerily calm over the sound of the highway. Finch ignored her. He unhooked the steel handcuffs from his belt. He grabbed her wrists, wrenched them forcefully behind her back, and clamped the cold metal down. The ratchets clicked loudly. Click, 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 locking into place. Stolen valor, my ass, Finch muttered under his breath, completely convinced he was the hero of the day. On the curb, Mitchell was laughing, cheering the officer on. Got her. Good job, officer. Finch patted Alicia down roughly, reaching into her right cargo pocket. He pulled out her leather wallet. He flipped it open, looking for a fake ID to prove his point. Instead, he pulled out a thick, heavy white plastic card with a microchip, a common access card. The Department of Defense insignia was printed flawlessly in the corner. Finch stared at it. His eyes darted to the name. Reynolds, Alicia M. His eyes moved to the rank. Colonel. His eyes moved to the expiration date. It was valid for another 3 years. His eyes moved to the affiliation. Active duty. The heavy, suffocating weight of reality suddenly crashed down on Officer Gregory Finch. The air left his lungs. The triumphant smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a pale, sickening dread. He looked down at the black woman, handcuffed against the car. He looked back at the ID. He hadn't just arrested a civilian. He had assaulted and unlawfully detained a senior commanding officer of the United States Army in broad daylight, and half a dozen civilian cameras were recording every single second of it. Officer Gregory Finch stared at the common access card, his thumb resting over the microchip. His brain desperately tried to process the information, searching for a loophole, a typo, anything that would prove the card was a sophisticated fake. But there was no mistaking the holographic overlay, the precise weight of the plastic, or the uncompromising glare of Colonel Alicia Reynolds staring back at him from the ID photo. The silence stretching between them felt heavier than gravity. The only sound was the distant hum of highway traffic and the rhythmic, mocking flash of the police cruiser's light bar. Officer, Alicia said, her voice cutting through the thick, humid air like a serrated blade. Is there an issue with my identification? Finch swallowed hard. His mouth was completely dry. He looked up, his eyes darting toward the bystanders. 3 cell phones were leveled directly at him, capturing every bead of sweat forming on his forehead. Finch stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating into sheer panic. He fumbled with the card, nearly dropping it on the wet pavement. Ma'am, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. He took a step forward, reaching out with his keys. Let me just get those cuffs off you, and we can clear this all up. Alicia stepped sideways, pivoting away from his outstretched hand. Do not touch me, she ordered, her tone sending a chill straight down Finch's spine. You do not get to assault me, illegally detain me, and then quietly sweep it under the rug when you realize you've made a career-ending mistake. Leave the cuffs exactly where they are. Colonel, please, Finch begged, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. If my sergeant sees this. You should have thought about your sergeant before you laid hands on a senior officer of the United States Armed Forces without probable cause, Alicia replied coldly. Call your supervisor now, and leave the radio on speaker. Over by the convenience store entrance, Mitchell Davies was growing impatient, ignorant to the catastrophic shift in the power dynamic. He marched toward them, his chest puffed out in his tight tactical shirt. "What's the holdup, officer?" Mitchell barked, jabbing a finger in Alicia's direction. "Cuff her and stuff her. Stop playing nice with these frauds. Read her rights, and throw her in the back of the cruiser." Finch spun around, his face pale and eyes wide, with a mixture of terror and sudden furious resentment towards the man who had initiated this disaster. "Back off, sir," Finch yelled, his voice cracking. "Just back away from the vehicle and shut your mouth." Mitchell stopped in his tracks, blinking in confusion. "Excuse me? I'm the one who called you. I'm the patriot here." "You're an idiot," Finch hissed under his breath, trembling as he reached for his shoulder mic. He pressed the button. "Dispatch, this is Unit 42. I need a sector supervisor at the Route 1 shell immediately. Code 3. Copy, Unit 42. Supervisor en route for the next 4 minutes." Nobody moved. Alicia stood rigidly against her car, her posture perfect despite the steel biting into her wrists. Finch paced back and forth, dragging his hands over his face, occasionally glancing at the cameras recording his demise. A heavy black SUV roared into the gas station lot, braking sharply next to Finch's cruiser. The door swung open and Sergeant William Lawson stepped out. Lawson was a 20-year veteran of the force, a man with graying temples who had zero patience for rookie mistakes. Lawson took one look at the scene. A black woman in an immaculate army uniform, handcuffed against a vehicle, and his junior officer looking like he was about to vomit. "Finch," Lawson snapped, striding forward. "What the hell is going on here?" Finch couldn't speak. He just shakily extended his hand, offering Lawson the military ID. Lawson snatched the card. He looked at the name. Colonel Reynolds, Alicia M. Lawson's eyes widened. He looked at Alicia, then back to the card, then down at the handcuffs securing her wrists. A look of absolute horror washed over the veteran sergeant's face. He knew immediately that Finch had just detonated a legal and public relations nuclear bomb. "Get the keys," Lawson growled at Finch, his voice vibrating with barely suppressed rage. "Get the keys and take those off her right this second." Finch practically tripped over his own boots, rushing forward to unlock the cuffs. The metal clicked open, and Alicia slowly brought her arms forward, rubbing her bruised wrists. "Colonel Reynolds," Sergeant Lawson said, his tone entirely deferential. He stood at attention, a stark contrast to Finch's earlier swagger. "Ma'am, I cannot apologize enough. This is an egregious failure of protocol and judgment. Are you injured?" "I am uninjured, Sergeant," Alicia said, her voice steady and commanding. She adjusted her sleeves, brushing the wrinkled fabric over her unit patch. "But your officer here assaulted me, illegally detained me, and violated my Fourth Amendment rights, all on the unverified word of a civilian who was harassing me based on his own racial and gender biases." Lawson shot a lethal glare at Finch. "Finch, go sit in your cruiser. Do not speak. Do not touch your radio." Finch didn't argue. He walked to his cruiser like a man marching to the gallows, shutting himself inside. "Ma'am, we will handle this internally. He will face severe disciplinary action," Lawson promised, practically pleading. "I can assure you, you won't be handling this internally, Sergeant," Alicia interrupted, pulling her phone from her pocket. She looked directly into Lawson's eyes. "I am an active duty colonel assigned to the Pentagon. You just unlawfully arrested a federal officer on her way to a classified briefing. My command will be involved. The Judge Advocate General will be involved. And my legal counsel will be heavily involved. This wasn't just a mistake, Sergeant. This was an arrogant display of unchecked authority, and I am going to make sure he never wears that badge again." She turned to look at Mitchell, who was now backing away toward his pickup truck, realizing the monumental gravity of his mistake. "And as for him," Alicia said, pointing at Mitchell, "I want him cited for initiating a false police report and public harassment." Lawson nodded immediately. "Consider it done, Colonel." The fallout was swifter and more brutal than anyone in the Richmond local government could have anticipated. By the time Alicia arrived at Fort Belvoir, 45 minutes late, but with one hell of an excuse, the videos recorded by the bystanders had already been uploaded to the internet. They spread like wildfire. By that evening, The clip of Officer Finch yanking a full-bird colonel by her uniform had amassed 6 million views across multiple platforms. The internet, as always, did its job with ruthless efficiency. Within hours, internet sleuths had identified Officer Gregory Finch. They also identified Mitchell Davies. The public backlash was a tidal wave of outrage, demanding immediate accountability. The next morning, Major General Richard Campbell, Alicia's commanding officer, made a direct closed-door phone call to the mayor of Richmond and police chief Robert Callahan. General Campbell did not yell. He didn't need to. He simply informed the chief that until a full, transparent investigation was concluded and the offending officer terminated, the United States military would suspend all joint training operations and logistical support grants with the local police department. The financial pressure was immense. Chief Callahan called an emergency press conference at noon. Sweating under the glare of the news cameras, he announced that Officer Gregory Finch had been stripped of his police powers and placed on unpaid administrative leave pending a formal termination hearing. The actions of this officer do not reflect the values of this department, Chief Callahan recited, reading from a prepared statement. We deeply apologize to Colonel Reynolds for this unacceptable incident. But the public wasn't satisfied, and neither was Alicia. 2 days later, Alicia filed a massive federal civil rights lawsuit against the city, the police department, and Gregory Finch individually, citing false imprisonment, assault, and battery. Because Finch had acted so blatantly outside of established law by demanding ID without reasonable suspicion of a crime, his qualified immunity was heavily contested. The police union, realizing the absolute toxicity of the case and the undeniable video evidence, quietly refused to cover his legal fees. Finch was officially fired by the end of the week. His dreams of being a hotshot detective evaporated, leaving him facing personal bankruptcy and a civil trial that he was guaranteed to lose. Mitchell Davies fared no better. The man who had proudly yelled "stolen valor" found his own life scrutinized by millions. It didn't take long for the internet to discover his employer. Mitchell was a regional manager for a mid-sized logistics company that heavily relied on government contracts. When the video of him instigating a racist, sexist harassment campaign against a decorated military officer went viral, the company's PR department panicked. Mitchell was fired within 48 hours. When he tried to complain on social media that he was a victim of cancel culture, the barrage of ridicule was so intense he had to delete all of his accounts. The local prosecutor, pressured by the immense public spotlight, formally charged Mitchell with filing a false police report and disorderly conduct. 1 week after the incident, Alicia stood behind a podium at a press conference organized by her civilian legal team. She was wearing her formal dress uniform, the silver eagles gleaming on her shoulders, the rows of ribbons on her chest, a testament to 2 decades of sacrifice and leadership. The room was packed with reporters. The camera shutters clicked furiously. I did not ask for this attention, Alicia began, her voice steady, resonating with absolute command. But I will not waste it. What happened to me at that gas station was not an anomaly. It was the predictable result of 2 dangerous assumptions. The first assumption, made by a civilian, was that a black woman could not possibly hold a position of high authority, and therefore my presence was an insult to his worldview. She looked directly into the primary news camera. The second assumption, made by law enforcement, was that the civilian's bias was inherently more trustworthy than my basic civil rights. Officer Finch didn't see a colonel. He saw a target. The room was dead silent, hanging on every word. I am fortunate, Alicia continued. I have the rank, the resources, and the platform to fight back. But I cannot stop thinking about the people who don't. The people who are illegally detained, assaulted, or worse, simply because someone's ego demanded their compliance. I am pursuing this legal action not for personal vindication, but to ensure that the cost of violating constitutional rights is so devastatingly high that no officer in this department ever thinks about doing it again. She stepped away from the podium, ignoring the shouted questions from the press, and walked out of the room with her head held high. Alicia Reynolds had spent her entire life fighting battles in hostile territory. She knew that winning didn't just mean surviving the encounter. It meant leaving the enemy in ruins so they could never attack anyone else again. Finch had thought he was slapping handcuffs on a helpless fraud. Instead, he had unknowingly chained himself to an unstoppable force, and it had dragged his entire world to the ground. Colonel Alicia's incredible story proves that true authority doesn't need to shout. It simply stands its ground. Unchecked egos and deep-seated prejudices blinded both a civilian and a police officer, ultimately costing them their reputations and careers. True heroes wear their honor on the inside, proving that integrity will always outshine ignorance.